Camilla's scream ripped through the mansion like a thunderclap, so sharp and raw that Richard Hamilton actually jolted hard enough to let the coffee cup slip from his hand. It hit the Italian marble and exploded, dark liquid splashing over a crystal vase that teetered once, twice, and shattered into glittering shards. For a second, the room froze in the kind of silence money buys heavy, polished, staged. Then Richard snapped out of it, face twisting with rage as he looked from the wreckage to the maid standing beneath the massive portrait in the main hall. "Have you lost your mind?" he barked, a vein bulging at his temple. "Do you understand what that vase cost? $300. You'll pay for it." But Camila didn't even blink. She wasn't looking at the glass. She wasn't looking at him. Her whole body trembled like she was standing in a blizzard, finger lifted and shaking toward the portrait towering above the fireplace. The painting showed a young blonde man in a tailored suit, serene smile, eyes bright in that effortless way of people born into comfort. And Camila looked like she'd seen a ghost walk out of her childhood and hang itself on this wall. "Boss, my mother adopted this boy," she whispered, voice breaking. "He grew up with me." Her eyes overflowed. "That's David." Richard's anger faltered for a split heartbeat, not because he believed her, but because there was something terrifyingly real in her certainty. She stepped closer to the painting, like the air around it was pulling her in. "David Hamilton," she read aloud from the gold plaque beneath the frame. Then she looked at Richard with a face that was all grief and fire. "Your son is the David who lived with us for 5 years." Richard went still. A man in a suit, said he was from social services, had papers. My mother tried to stop him, screamed until her throat bled, but the documents looked real. They shoved David into a car. We never saw him again. The silence after that confession wasn't polite. It was violent. Richard's lips parted without sound. He swayed slightly, gripping the back of a leather armchair as if the floor had tilted. "That's impossible," he muttered. "David was at St. Andrew's private school when—" Camila took a step forward, and in that one step her whole posture shifted. She wasn't the quiet woman who polished his floors and disappeared into side doors anymore. She looked like someone who'd carried a boulder for 17 years and had finally found the crack to drop it through. "When what, Mr. Hamilton?" she asked. "Do you really believe your son died? Or do you believe what they told you because it was easier than asking why you never saw his body?" The question hit him like a slap. Memories he'd buried under years of wealth and numbness started clawing up. The private investigators who stopped returning his calls, the frantic days of searching, the social worker who insisted on immediate cremation for public health reasons, the sealed hospital reports, the way everyone around him pushed him toward acceptance before he'd even understood what happened. He'd been grieving a coffin he never looked inside. "Prove it," he rasped. "If you're telling the truth, prove it." Camila pulled her phone out, and her hands weren't shaking now. "I have photos, Mr. Hamilton. I have the birth certificate my mother kept when David showed up at our door. And I have something else that will make you understand this is bigger and dirtier than you think." She paused, letting it land. "But before I show you anything, I need to know, are you ready to find out who really stole your son? Because once you know, your life won't be the same." Richard swallowed. His throat felt dry as sand. He'd spent 17 years breathing through a wound he never let open. And now the invisible maid he'd ignored for 2 years was holding a knife that might finally cut the truth out. He tried to grab back control the only way he knew how, by shrinking her. Richard squared his shoulders. Forced a scoff and poured himself a whiskey from the crystal bar, like drowning a nightmare in prestige. "Do you really expect me to believe a maid has information about my son that I, with every resource on earth, couldn't find?" He didn't offer her a drink. He never did. "You people always invent stories to make yourselves feel important. David Hamilton lived in circles you can't even imagine. Private tutors, elite schools, security. He would never have been wandering into some neighborhood like yours." Camila didn't flinch. She watched him like she'd seen this play 100 times. David was a terrified kid who showed up on a Sunday, crying, expensive clothes torn. "No memory of how he got there," she said. "You think scared children care about your circles? That's a lie, Richard snapped. My son would never be in a place like that. Of course not, Camila said, dangerously calm. Because you don't even know where I live, do you? You don't know anything about me? I've cleaned this house for 2 years. To you, I'm furniture that moves. Richard rolled his eyes. Don't be dramatic. You get paid. $300 a week to clean a 15-room mansion, she shot back. 6 in the morning to 8 at night, 6 days a week. That's $2 an hour. He shrugged like that was weather. If you don't like it, you can leave. There are hundreds who would kill for your job. Camila smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. You're right. There are thousands desperate enough to accept being treated like air, but none of them have what I have. And what would that be? He asked, bored again, certain he'd crushed her. The truth about what really happened to David. Richard's jaw tightened. He died in an accident at school. You have papers given to you by people who needed you to stop digging? Camila said. She pulled a chair closer and sat without being invited. That tiny act of defiance did more to shake him than any yelling. You never saw his body, did you? Richard opened his mouth, shut it. The silence was answer enough. Camila leaned forward. My mother, Donna Rosa, worked as a nanny in your neighborhood. She knew the families. She knew what they hid behind charity dinners and church smiles. She overheard things no one thought a woman like her was allowed to hear. Richard tried to keep his voice steady. What are you implying? Do you want the truth? She asked. Or do you want the illusion? His whiskey trembled in his grip. Speak. Camilla's eyes didn't blink. David didn't die, Mr. Hamilton. She let the pause sharpen. He was sold. The room turned icy. Richard's face drained of color. Sold. To whom he whispered. To a wealthy family out of state, she said. A family that paid for a blonde, blue-eyed, well-educated son with no ties to the past. My mother heard it. She was in a kitchen putting away dishes when she heard your people talking, like David was a car being traded. Richard staggered, dropping his glass. It shattered. He didn't even notice. That's insane, he choked. Who would do that?
Doctor.
Patricia Kellerman, Camila said. The social worker who came to our place with fake documents. The same woman who visited you in the hospital after the so-called accident. She wasn't helping you. She was managing a transfer. Richard's eyes widened. A name he'd half forgotten surged into focus. Patricia, she was there. She said she'd handle all the paperwork so I could recover. Exactly. Camila pulled a battered folder from her cleaning bag like she'd been carrying this war in plain sight. 17 years of evidence. Fake certificates. Bank trails. Travel logs. Witness statements. Everything I could find. Richard stared at the papers like they were snakes. How could you? He stopped. How could a maid get that Camilla's mouth curved, and now the smile looked almost cruel, not because she enjoyed his fear, but because she'd been waiting to show him what invisible people can do. You think cleaning houses is my only skill that I spent 17 years dusting. I worked as a fraud analyst before I decided to come here. His head snapped up. Decided. To come here? I didn't stumble into your life, she said softly. I infiltrated it. The word landed heavy. I studied your routine for months. I knew your housekeeper was retiring. I knew you like workers who don't make noise. I became what you wanted so I could sit in your shadow and unmask the people who stole my brother. Richard's hands began to shake. You lied to me. I lied about being powerless, Camila corrected. I never lied about loving David. Her voice broke for the first time. He called me Sister Cam. I taught him to ride a bike. I held his hand when thunder scared him. I couldn't stop men with papers and guns and money. But I promised myself I'd grow into someone who could. She turned to the window, staring out at his manicured gardens like they were a joke. And now I have. Richard's anger had died somewhere between sold and infiltrated. What was left was stripping, horrifying clarity. Who did this? He croaked. Who benefited? Camila slid one more document forward. Patricia Kellerman was a clerk. The payments she got came from an offshore account linked to Hartwell Corporation. Richard's eyes narrowed. Hartwell. James Hartwell, Camila said. Your business partner for 20 years. Your partner who pushed you to sign your company shares over when you were drowning in grief? 20 million in assets sold for 2 million because you were emotionally unstable. Remember that? Richard's knees weakened. He gripped the chair. Memories clicked into place like a trap closing. James insisting on streamlining the estate. James handling meetings he could barely sit through. James's gentle voice saying, "For David." Richard had signed because he was broken. Broken people sign whatever steady hands put in front of them. They needed me alive too, Richard muttered, seeing the shape of it. To legitimize the sale? Exactly, Camila said. A nanny you're showing. Orphan is cheaper on the black market. A child transferred through fake legal documents with a grieving father's signature is worth millions. Before he could speak again, the front door opened. A tall black man in a clean suit stepped into the hall with a backpack slung over his shoulder. Calm presence. Eyes that scanned the room like a professional. Hamilton, he said, extending a hand. I'm Marcus Henderson, investigative journalist. Camila and I have been working this case for 6 years. Richard shook his hand numbly. You two fiancés, Camila said. Partners in every sense. He's been tracing the trafficking network. I've been tracing the finances. Marcus set his bag down on the table and unfolded a small camera, a microphone, tools of truth. Patricia Kellerman isn't even close to the top, he said. The operation includes judges, private school administrators, doctors, social workers, and corporate executives. Some of the richest people in this state have built families by buying children the way you buy property. Richard stared. How many? At least 40 cases we can prove, Camila said. And tomorrow there's another auction. The word auction hollowed his chest. Marcus opened the bag and showed a tablet full of recordings, secret conversations, dates, voices. 10 children, he said. Ages 6 to 12. Pre-selected buyers. High-end clientele. The meeting is at Hartwell's country mansion 2 hours from here. Richard's mouth went dry. How do you know? Camila lifted her chin. Because I've been inside his circle for 2 years under a false identity. I posed as a representative for a wealthy European family interested in discreet adoption. James trusts me. He thinks I'm one of his best customers. Richard recoiled. This is a war. It has to be, Marcus said. The FBI knows about the auction, but they need conclusive evidence buyers' money exchange, fake custody transfers, all on record. If I do this, will we find David? Camila and Marcus exchanged a look that held a weight he didn't like. There's something you need to know, Camila said softly. Something I was saving because I didn't want to break you before you were ready. Richard's eyes searched her face. What? She swallowed once. David is alive. The words didn't feel real. Alive, not just alive, Marcus added grimly. He's in tomorrow's auction. Richard's world tilted. No, that can't. Camila turned the tablet toward him. A grainy surveillance photo showed a young man being escorted into a van. Blonde hair, sharp jaw, eyes that could have been painted by the same artist who made the portrait in his hall. Older now, 29, with a guardedness in his face that screamed survival. Richard's chest cracked open. That's him, he breathed. Where has he been? Shema, with a wealthy family in Chicago, Camila said. They paid $2 million when he was 12. Gave him a new name, new life. But 6 months ago, David started asking questions, looking for his past. They panicked and returned him to Hartwell like he was a warranty problem. Richard covered his mouth as a sob rose. My son spent 17 years thinking someone else was his father. Camila's voice softened, but only slightly, and now they want to sell him again because he refused to stay quiet. She looked him dead in the eye. Tomorrow we take him back. The plan moved like clockwork after that. Richard accepted Hartwell's invite. Camila arrived first as Mrs. Vanderbilt, flawless accent, blonde wig, jewelry borrowed from a world she'd learned to enter like a knife. Richard arrived as the grieving billionaire, ready to move on. Hartwell was thrilled, smug, drunk on power. The auction hall was a ballroom dressed up like luxury, but it smelled like a slaughterhouse once you knew what you were looking at. 10 children were brought out in clean clothes, eyes frightened, numbers on clipboards. Buyers laughed softly over wine. Richard's hands trembled under the table. He kept his face smooth because Marcus had warned him, if you flinch too early, you lose the mission. When David was let out, time stretched. He walked in with his head high, but his eyes were hollow as if he'd learned not to hope. Hartwell introduced him like a product. Premium acquisition, he called him. Exceptional education, perfect appearance, no complications. Richard had to look away for a second so he wouldn't collapse. Camila raised her paddle, voice steady, and bid. The numbers climbed like a fever. She won. Hartwell smiled and handed her forged custody papers with a greasy bow. Congratulations on your acquisition, Mrs. Vanderbilt. That's when the doors blew open. FBI, hands up. Lights flooded the room. Agents poured in like a wave. Buyers screamed. Some tried to run. Hartwell froze mid-step, still holding the transfer folder. He stared at Camila as she reached up and peeled off the blonde wig, letting her curls fall free like a flag. Who are you? He stammered. Camila Santos, she said, voice ringing through the chaos. David Hamilton's sister, she pointed at him. And you, James Hartwell, are under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. Richard watched the man who had destroyed his life crumble in real time. But he barely felt satisfaction, because his eyes were locked on David, who was being escorted out by agents, not in cuffs, but in a protective circle. David's gaze met Richard's for the first time. Dad? Richard's knees almost buckled. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and pulled his son into his arms like he'd been holding his breath for 17 years and could finally breathe again. Yes, he choked. It's me. I'm here. I'm so sorry. David broke against him, sobbing in a way no bought family could have fixed. I thought I was crazy, he whispered. I always felt like something was missing. You weren't crazy, Camila said softly from behind, crying too. You were stolen. David turned to her and stared like he was seeing a dream. Cam? Sister Cam, she smiled through tears. I told you I'd find you. Six months later, the trial shook the country. 17 arrests turned into dozens as the ring collapsed under evidence Camila and Marcus had been collecting for years. Judges lost robes. Principals lost jobs. Doctors lost licenses. Buyers went to prison. Wealthy families who'd built perfect lives on someone else's nightmare were dragged into daylight. James Hartwell got life. Patricia Kellerman got 25. The auction mansion was seized. The children were reunited with families when possible, placed in safe care when not. The headlines called it the biggest child trafficking bust in the state's history. But inside the rebuilt family, the victory was quieter. David sat on the porch of Richard's home one evening, looking out over gardens that once felt like a prison to Camila. Family isn't blood or paperwork, he said, voice steady for the first time in years. It's who fights for you when the world says you're gone. Richard nodded, eyes wet. You were never gone to us, Camila whispered. Not in our hearts. David's lips trembled into a smile. Then I'm home, and that was the real ending. Not Hartwell's fall, not the news cameras, not the revenge. The real ending was a brother returned, a father awakened from a 17-year lie, a sister who turned invisibility into a weapon sharp enough to cut through the richest corruption. Sometimes justice doesn't roar at first. Sometimes it cleans floors quietly for 2 years, listens, watches, gathers proof, and then drops the truth like thunder right in the center of a mansion built on secrets. And if you believe that love like that you really believe in, furious, relentless, always finds its way home, then you already know why stories like this matter. So stay with us, because the next one might remind you again that no matter how deep the lie, truth has a way of coming back for what was stolen.